Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode number 48 of the Natural Female Muscle Podcast. Welcome back if you are joining us again for this episode, and welcome in general if you are new to the podcast. This is a podcast where I generally ramble about various different bodybuilding related topics. Hopefully, ones that are helpful, some useful information within these, hopefully, alongside my general rambling. But yeah, welcome to this week's episode where we're going to talk about the different classes for females and how you essentially go about choosing your class. Like what is the right class for you, how to set your expectations as well within those divisions and within just your general bodybuilding journey as a result of that within that competitive season, whether that be your first time, your second time doing competitive season and trying to decide what class you're doing. And this is something that, obviously I talk about all the time with clients, but is also something that I've had to consider massively within my own process. It's been something that, for anyone who has followed along with my journey, has been a big part of where I've been heading with my bodybuilding process, going from doing bikini for my first season, and I'm now obviously in prep for what will be a season of doing a different division and having a go at figure. So it's something that I can relate to very much myself when it comes to trying to find the right division for you, and also transitioning from different divisions and trying to find where you get the most fulfillment and also the most success within your bodybuilding journey. Because I think this is like the biggest thing is when it comes to finding the right division for you, it's trying to figure out, okay, where do we fit, and also where are we then also going to be the most competitive, and what also brings you the most enjoyment. So there are a balance of different things when it comes to finding your category, finding the class that is going to give you the best outcome with your bodybuilding experience. I think that's the most important thing to note. So we're going to break this down a little bit today. I will make sure to try and keep this episode relatively short and sweet so you can get the information that you need and then not have to hang around for too long. But the main things we're going to talk through today are, one, what is the best class for you? So let's break that down, how to figure that out. Are we then only set to ever compete in one class? And how do you manage your expectations for that class and for your competitive outcomes based on that decision? So there's a few different things that we will go through. But I think before we kind of dive into those key points, it makes sense for us to actually run through what the actual classes are first and foremost, because I'm sure there'll be some people listening to this who still maybe don't have a huge amount of familiarity with the different classes, like what's available, what's the real difference between the different options that are there. Because I think a lot of people think entry standard and they just think, oh, bikini, or just go here, and there are different options available, and that changes from federation to federation as well. But the main four categories that you're going to get in most natural federations and also most other federations as well is going to be bikini, figure, women's physique, which is also sometimes called fit body in WNBF, or athletic. There are obviously minor differences between the two, but they're all pretty much the same. And then there's obviously women's bodybuilding. So these are the kind of main four. Some federations do offer wellness, but it's a little bit less common. Those are kind of the main four that you're looking at. And when you're looking at the difference between these categories, in very, very, very simple terms, you're kind of titrating from the lower levels of muscularity and condition up to the highest levels of muscularity and condition within that criteria, because there are very, very varying different levels of criteria within that. And that does not necessarily mean that let's be honest, the leanest, biggest competitor is generally in women's bodybuilding. But sometimes, like for example, the size discrepancy between a figure and a bikini athlete, it's not massive, but there's maybe a difference in conditioning, there's maybe a difference in the shape, in the structure. And this is where usually like the structure plays a very, very big role between these divisions. And that can play a massive role in terms of where you actually then land. So, like, for example, you might be at the muscular level of a bikini athlete, but structurally, you might actually be suited to figure long term, or you might be at the muscular level of figure, but shape wise, you might be better off in something like women's physique or in women's bodybuilding. So, you don't always get these kind of criteria that match in the sense that, okay, just because you're at a level of conditioning and muscularity for a certain division doesn't necessarily mean that's where you're best suited at that current point in time, and vice versa. So there are quite a few different things for us to consider when we look at, okay, what is maybe going to be the best and most competitive class for you based on your set genetic like predisposition before we even take into consideration, I suppose, like the bodybuilding aspect of like actually building tissue or coming down into condition. So the main things we're going to go through here are going to be structure, muscularity, so like the level of muscle that you've got, your muscle insertions and your muscle bellies, how the muscle actually sits on your frame, how it looks, the shape of the muscle, body fat distribution, which funnily enough is actually very, very important. You might think, oh, but we're all coming down to stage lean condition. What role does that play? Plays a pretty big role, especially for some categories. And also the attainable level of condition that you can just get in general, which, to be fair, like the level of condition is sometimes relative to the muscle mass, because the more muscle you have, the leaner that you can get, the more mature that muscle is, the leaner it's going to kind of look. But at the same time, there are genetic presets there where like some people will just have a grainy look and others won't. And that's maybe not even necessarily relative to the amount of muscle mass that they've got. So there's a few different things that we can look at there, but we'll start by going through them in order. So the first thing, we're talking about structure. This is a really, really big one. When I talk about structure, what do I mean? I mean the structure of your physique. And this is like the bones, your body, how everything fits, your waist, your hip width, your clavicular width, your height, your proportions when it comes to like the length of your arms, the length of your legs, the length of your torso, how you are essentially just built. And every class is honestly influenced by this in terms of what structure is most suited to that specific division. So, like for example, this is where with bikini, and this is the same thing figure. I know I mentioned, oh, bikini is all about, and this is a big misconception, is people think, oh, it's the smallest muscularity division, and you don't get super lean for bikini, but you've got to have a certain structure to be competitive in bikini. And I actually think bikini is like one of the hardest categories to nail in terms of being really, really competitive, because you have got to have this perfect like balance that they're looking for. But when you're looking at like bikini, for example, generally you're wanting like a very, very, very small waist. You want to have relatively like narrow hips. See, this also still depends. And you don't necessarily want to be super, super wide. Like, and again, federation to federation, it changes. But that's where like, okay, structure is important. Maybe if you have got a super wide waist or you've got very, very, very wide hips, that could play a role in you maybe not being super suited to that division in the long term. Figure, you're looking at, this is probably one of the biggest ones where structure plays a role, because the criteria for figure athletes is pretty much they want to see an X frame. And that is also true for the other divisions. So, X frames are really what they want to see in bodybuilding. You've got that kind of hourglass look, and that still will help you to be more competitive in classes like bodybuilding, in classes like women's physique. But figure especially is very, very much X frame based, because they want to see the shape. It's very much about shape, because you're not getting super lean for categories like figure. So as a result, if you have that kind of structure, that wide clavicular width, super, super small waist, that's where you kind of get the benefit there. So you can start to see where I'm kind of going with how structure can play a role, because it meets the criteria for those set divisions. Now, the difference when you get to classes like women's bodybuilding or women's physique is that you've got more tools to play with. So in the grand scheme of things, it's not just based on, structure or shape. You can maybe start to edge things out a bit more with muscularity or with condition. You can start to find other strengths, or maybe just your shape is not suited for, bikini or figure, but you've got a good amount of muscle and you look epic in bodybuilding shots, or in the more muscular shots or whatever that may be. So you will have a certain structure that potentially suits certain classes more, and you will see this when you hit poses for those divisions. It will generally be pretty apparent which poses kind of look right or not, even just from the structure side of things. So that's where the structure plays a role, and kind of tied into that is the kind of second point, which is the actual muscle insertions and muscle bellies. So like basically how your muscle is shaped, how it sits on your physique, which again, especially for those kind of earlier divisions like bikini and figure, which again, that's the biggest preconception, is everyone says, oh, the earlier divisions, lower muscularity. Like, for example, in bikini, if you've got really, really round glutes, like that's something that will stand out in that class. If you have really sweepy quads, that will stand out in figure. And likewise, it's like if you have really, really big quads, like naturally, maybe that actually makes you look too big for bikini. And, you've got like a really, really big back naturally, maybe you're going to look a bit out of place in a bikini lineup, or whatever it may be. So looking at actually how the muscle sits in your frame and how that then affects the balance and your ability to meet criteria within those specific divisions. So those two are kind of things that are genetically just the way that they are. They're things that you maybe can't necessarily change, even if you add more tissue or you get leaner. This is just kind of the way you are built. And sometimes you'll look at someone and instantly you're like, whoa, you've got super sweet quads, you've got crazy glutes, or you've got just like these crazy arms, like you look so good in bodybuilding because you're just big there, like whatever it may be. And that will be like, okay, strikingly, this is going to be a great division for you if you want to compete there. Some people, like, you'll look at them and structurally or based on their insertions, whatever it is, there's nothing that really strikes as being, okay, you're this division, you're definitely like going to be super competitive here. You might sit between the two, or you might not have an absolute clue where you're going to be at. And that's where then you'll look at the muscularity and the condition predominantly as your leading factor as to where you maybe want to sit in terms of the class you want to compete in. I did also mention body fat distribution, which is an important point to consider when it comes down to the class that you compete in when you're getting stage lean. And what I mean by this is if you have some areas that hold or don't hold a lot of body fat, that can affect you when it comes to hitting the criteria for that class. So a couple of examples here. So like with bikini, if for you to get a slight glute ham tie-in, you are literally striated through your quads, or you've got crazy like delt striations, you're going to be off balance because then your upper body or your quads are too lean in order for you to get your lower body into condition. It can be kind of like also the other way around, where like for somebody to even get their upper body into condition, their lower body has to get so lean. So as a result, they're maybe then just too lean overall for classes like figure. And so sometimes the class that you compete in is also dependent on, okay, what's going to allow you to also meet the criteria of condition on stage. Are you then going to be too lean or too far off? And being able to also understand that is definitely a point. So those are, like I say, they're kind of all of the genetic variables that you have to play into consideration. But that's also not to say that you can't manage that. And I was actually having this discussion with AJ yesterday, where we were talking about how, one, you can obviously manage someone on the way down to make sure that like a certain body part doesn't go too flat or maybe doesn't end up too conditioned compared to others. But especially when it comes to the peaking process, it's where you can almost intentionally inflame a muscle group so that it loses some of that detail going into the show. So I actually did this with my client Tash last year, where she has got pretty decent quads to the point where for like UKDFBA, like Natural Federation Bikini, they were a little bit too lean. For federations like PCA, they were like perfect. But like I've mentioned, they don't want to be seeing, like lines in your quads or veins in your quads in UKDFBA bikinis. So I actually got her to do like a pretty normal leg session, very close to a show, just so that her quads would be more inflamed and they wouldn't be as detailed on stage. So it's things like that that you can manage to make sure that if somebody still is at the muscularity level or has the shape, this is really not the best time during a podcast. We'll sort it out later. Sorry, guys. This is how chaotic these episodes are. But if somebody is maybe not entirely there, like for the criteria, and there's a few things that may be a bit too lean or whatever it is, you can always manipulate it if needed. But aside from that, the next most strikingly obvious considerations that we all know are going to be, okay, what's your muscle mass like and what kind of condition can you get into? And as we said, that tends to titrate from class to class. So irrelevant of where your structure is, irrelevant of what your genetic insertions are like, or whatever it may be, you're going to be at a level of muscularity and attainable condition where you will be more suited to one division or the other, and that's why a lot of girls start off in bikini or figure, because those are the classes where muscularity is somewhat obviously lower, condition is not quite as extreme, and so it's more attainable for a lot of females when it comes to the start of their bodybuilding process. That's not to say that that's where they will be all the time. It's not to say that that's where they will be most competitive, but that's relative to where they are appropriately at that set point in time. So that's kind of the main overview that you have to ask yourself. And honestly, the best way for you to get a good understanding of what that also looks like is, one, have a coach who knows what the level of muscularity is, what the level of condition is, but also like going to shows and being able to actually see what that looks like on stage, so that you can see, okay, this is what this looks like, and if I'm to compete now, I will probably need to compete in that division. Is that something that I want to do? And we're going to come on to talking about the timing aspect of that, because that's a really, really, really big part of it, is just where you're at that point in time versus where you maybe will be in the long run. And some of you are probably now thinking at this point, okay, does this mean that I am only set for one division? Because I've obviously spoken a lot about the genetic component, where you're maybe most genetically suited. And most of us will have a category that we are more suited to than others, just naturally. Like you might naturally have the shape for this class or the shape for this class, whatever it may be. But there will be some people who are what I kind of like to call like hybrid competitors, where they look really good in different poses, even at the same level of muscularity and condition. Like sometimes you'll get girls who look good in wellness and good in figure, or good in figure and good in women's physique, depending on how lean they want to get, or good in bikini and good in figure. Like there are sometimes situations where you can fit into both, and sometimes like preference plays a really big role there for those individuals. Is like, okay, where do you actually want to compete? And even aside from people who naturally look good in multiple different classes, you can, even if you're not genetically perfectly built for that class, like say you want to do figure but you don't have naturally wide clavicles, you can still build really big side delts. You can still build the biggest quads that you can do to get, a bigger X frame to your physique. If you're maybe don't have these natural massive bikini glutes, you can build big glutes. You know, like there are ways that you can still work towards these categories over time by really fine tuning your approach and adding muscularity to the areas that allow you to be more competitive in those divisions. And that's where you then kind of have those discussions with your coach and you look at your physique, and this is why bodybuilding is such an art and it's such an amazing thing, and why, you know, don't expect yourself to nail things also in your first season, because you will learn so much about how your physique looks when it comes down, how it looks in different poses, and what different body parts look like and how that changes, you know, across peak weeks, how that changes across a prep, and how that affects, you know, structure. And it's like always about the year by year, like maybe fine tuning different things, adding a bit more attention to this body part or this area or whatever it may be to lead you towards the class where you want to compete, because preference plays a big role. And obviously so does time. And this is when now you kind of weigh up, with taking all these things into consideration, when you're wanting to compete and what your actual preference is. Because I think that above anything else, it's really, really important that you do love the category that you compete in. I think that's key. But you might, for example, be in a position where, you know, long term, you want to do women's physique or women's bodybuilding, but you're just not quite there yet. But you also don't want to wait 10 years to step on stage. And you kind of have to appreciate that, like, okay, like that's maybe long term where I want to be, but right now this is where I'm at, and I'm going to compete in bikini, or I'm going to compete in figure, and I'm going to give it my best shot and see where I'm at and keep working on this kind of like long term journey of where I am. And I think that's something that a lot of girls struggle with, is thinking like, oh, maybe I'm not right for this category, or, you know, should I wait forever to do this one category that I want to do? And I think there's a balance. I think that, you know, if you're a first time competitor and you're ready to get on stage, I think there is huge benefit in getting on stage, you know, like getting down in stage lean condition. If you definitely have enough muscularity to, you know, endure prep, is like coming down, seeing if you actually enjoy it before you spend a really long time working towards, you know, doing a prep that you might not actually love. Seeing if you enjoy it, setting a baseline, understanding where you can build from there. I think there is huge merit in that, but being able to then manage your expectations around that is quite important. And I feel as though my own example is quite good at explaining this, I suppose, with where I've competed, where I am competing, and where I want to compete in the future. It's probably likely that by the end of my bodybuilding career, I'll have probably had a go in a few different categories, which I quite like the idea of, to be honest. But like when I did my first season, so I competed in bikini because I wanted to compete. You know, I wanted to step on stage. I wanted to see if I enjoyed the prep process. I wanted to see what my physique looked like, where my progress was at the level of muscularity that I was at that point. Bikini was where I was. And to be honest, like long term, I already knew kind of going into that prep that I didn't want to do bikini forever. I wasn't sure, you know, initially, like when I first started bodybuilding, I thought, oh, I'd love bikini. And I learned through that prep that, oh, okay, I don't actually love this that much in terms of the training and the approach to that. And that was a good thing because it helped me to then see, okay, this is what I don't want to do moving forwards. Like I enjoyed that prep, but I also learned, okay, like maybe I actually want to hit more muscular poses, or I want to grow my back more, or I want to grow my arms more, you know, things like that. But I knew that was a learning experience for me. I needed to have that first experience of stepping on stage and seeing where I was at, and then being able to actually set goals from there, and knowing that I love the process of doing it. Coming away from that, I was like, right, I want to improve, I want to get bigger. And that's why this season I'm competing in figure. Now, I still don't think that, I'm trying to find the right words for this, I don't think I'll be that competitive in a figure line. I really don't know. But I'm not genetically built for figure. Let's put it that way. So this is a great example of the genetics element, is I am not structurally the best figure competitor, like on paper. You know, I've got narrow clavicles. I'm very short, I'm very small, I've not got super sweepy quads, I've not got a massive back, I've not got the best inserting lats, things like that, that, on paper don't make me a perfect fit for figure in the long term. Even just the way that my body fat distributes, potentially also not the best. But that's not to say that I won't still manage this year and compete to my best ability, because I will do. But I know that long term, that's not really where I want to be, because it's not. And that's also my preference. Long term, I want to be able to compete in women's bodybuilding. That's where I want to be. It's going to take me a long time to get there. And I'm also just ready to compete this year. I've taken 4 years off. So now it's like time for me to get on stage, see those improvements, compete where I land, and that's likely going to be figure. That's the plan. So you can't always just be waiting for this one goal here and thinking, oh, but genetically I'm not suited here. It's like, fuck that. You can still do well and you can still be competitive and you can still bring your absolute best to wherever you're at that point in time. Don't feel like you can't compete because you think that you're not genetically perfect for a given division. Bodybuilding is a journey. It's a journey. And like I say, every season, every time you compete, you will learn more about where you want to be, and finding that balance of the division that brings you the most joy, the division that you enjoy the most. And that's what you find. Like, I could even compete this year and find that I love figure and think, I actually want to stay here and I want to build on this or whatever it is. Like, that's the thing, is you never know until you go through those experiences. And I think that this is now like the expectation side of things, is just understanding, okay, like this is where I'm at this point, and this is where I'm at this part of my bodybuilding career, and where I need to be so that I can step on stage, or so that I can display improvements and not worry too much about being perfect for something. So hopefully my own example kind of like puts that into perspective a little bit better. And I suppose, like, on the note of expectations as well, you have to understand that given the category that you do decide to compete in, what is expected of you based on criteria. Because from the outset, a lot of people just think, okay, I'm prepping, I'm getting on stage, I need to be super shredded, or I need to be really lean, or I need to like this. Like, you're meeting criteria. That is really, really important. And a good coach will make sure that they manage your prep and they manage your level of muscularity, they manage your body to meet that criteria as best as possible. And that might mean not getting as lean as you physically can do, especially for categories like bikini figure, but even in categories like bodybuilding, and women's physique, where maybe you lose certain strengths to your physique if you push too hard, or maybe you don't have that maturity yet to push for lines in your glutes. You just need to kind of let your glutes kind of cap off, and then you'll be in a good spot. There is a balance to be had with those things, so that you can bring your absolute best, and being able to manage what is expected of yourself in that prep. And again, bring yourself back to, like, bodybuilding is an art form at the end of the day. When you get on, it's not just about do the most or be the leanest. And I've spoken about this so many times on the podcast. So make sure that once you've got that category set in mind, what you're working towards, that you know what the goal is, because that's always the like most upsetting thing sometimes for me to see with competitors on stage, is when they look incredible but they don't place, or they don't get a specific result because they just didn't quite meet the criteria. Like seeing girls in figure who are absolutely shredded, but they're just not suited to figure because they're too lean, or they've pushed too lean to the point where they've lost like that X frame, that shape, which is so important. And just things like that. You see it in bikini all the time. I see some shredded bikini girls, which I've got mad respect for. But then, like I say, it's a shame if they're not meeting the criteria for that federation or for that class or whatever it may be. So managing expectations is something that we definitely have to do there. But honestly, I think, to cap off this episode and to cap off my points, everything I mentioned above is important when it comes to things to consider when you choose a category to compete in, and when it comes to picking a category to be most competitive within that class. But the love for what you do is very important, and I'm a big believer that when you love the category that you do, you will also be competitive. And when you're also in a class where you're competitive, you probably will love it a little bit more as well. But having enjoyment of that process is the key thing above anything else. Like most of us here, we're not, not, no one is a natural bodybuilder or women's bodybuilding in general. Unfortunately, no one's making a career out of this in terms of making money out of it. So, the biggest thing is that you have fulfillment in what you're doing. That should be the key thing with your bodybuilding journey. So yes, getting an opinion for where is appropriate for you and where makes sense for you to compete, yes, but do make sure that you enjoy it, because that is the absolute fundamentals above really anything else. So yeah, hopefully this has been a helpful episode for you guys to listen to today. I've enjoyed talking about this one and actually giving a little bit of my own example as well, which hopefully as we kind of go through this year, I'll be able to like refer to at different points. I go through different topics and maybe relating it to where I'm at, to make the episodes a little bit more interesting. But yeah, it's been great to talk about that one today. And thank you so much to anyone who has listened along. If you are new to the podcast, if you can rate the podcast, subscribe, or if you haven't already done so and you're listening, please make sure to do so. It'd be amazing, just to make sure that other people can see that you enjoy the podcast and the episodes. But yeah, other than that, thank you so much for listening, guys, and I'll be back with another episode in the coming weeks.